Good evening, everybody, and welcome back. This is Night Flight. And Gary and I have decided to do the first part again because it went poof. And so he has agreed to come back, and I thank him very much for that. Gary Wayne, welcome back to Night Flight.
Yes, nice to see you. Seems like it was just yesterday that we spoke. It's pretty close. So hoping that we can get the message out without having it interrupted or erased or lost or frozen or all the different things that we seem to be being attacked with on the last show. But as you know, we all experience this with technology and seemingly on sensitive subjects. So yes, very happy to be back and looking forward to completing the show.
Okay, so I just wanted to briefly touch on the Pope. Last time we talked about that, we both thought it will be a little bit tricky to convince Muslims to give up their religion. And now the Pope went to the United Arab Emirates, and he will go at the end of March to Morocco. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I guess it's part of what's going to continue to take place as we go further forward and close in on the end times. So the Pope is at the forefront of universal religion consolidation. He's working with all of the various groups. You know, a couple of years ago, he had a deity conference at the Vatican where he had a seraphim, dragon, angel, god that was in there that comes out of the was the war god out of the Quiché Maya and the Aztecs. So this is something that is going to continue to happen, and they're trying to harmonize all of the religions so that they can create an umbrella world religion. And the whole concept is compromise, because all religions have their truths, whether or not one buys into that or not. Whether they're secular or whatever religion that they're in, but they all come to the table with their own scripture, their own doctrines, and so they're trying to pull this thing together, but it's about compromise. So all the religions will have to compromise to fulfill the uniting of this religion. And of course, the Pope sees himself, and he's a Jesuit, and this has been part of the Jesuit Templar Rosicrucian plan all the way through, is to use the Jesuit order inside the church as one of their agenda items to prepare it to be the Babylon of Revelation, to be the city-state, the one that brings about the world empire and takes a tribute on all the transactions in the end time, and will sit on many waters. So this is the universal religion that we're talking about that he's trying to pull together, and with him or another one that comes after him as the leader. And so a lot of people believe he's the anti-pope in Catholic prophecy, and that comes from a variety of sources. Two main sources on this are the Pope Malachi in the 1200s, who did a prophecy of all the popes, and on the count and on the description, he seems to be the last one. And anti-pope is replacement pope, or opposite pope. And of course, Benedict was replaced by him, was still alive, which is a rare thing. I think 1600s was the last time that came about. And he's a Jesuit, which is important because Nostradamus, another Rosicrucian, who sponsored the Jesuits, had predicted this end pope would be the Black Pope. And of course, the leader of the Jesuits is the Black Pope, just as the leader of the Vatican is the White Pope. So now that's consolidated, and he's consolidated control, replacing doctrine head of chief there with another Jesuit, usurping control over the Knights of St. John and in absolute total control. So he's pulling all these things together in preparation for this end time religion. But I think it's going to take some catalysts to bring it about, because as you mentioned, the Muslim people are very, very loyal, at least the Sufis and the Shia, even though they may be enemies with each other, they're loyal within their sects. Sufis will fit in quite easily because that's the mystic sect, the Kabbalistic sect, the organization that sponsored the Templars and their organizational structure as a Gnostic polytheist society that went back to Europe that ended up producing the Rosicrucians. But it's the Shia and it's the Sunni and some of the subgroups, which is going to be very, very difficult. So it's going to take things like catastrophes, contrived catastrophes, to scare people into the transition to come under this umbrella religion. And I think they're going to use sort of crossover things like Mary, which is important to, at least in the Quran it is, although they tend to take her down a notch through the Hadiths, just as they do with anything that has a reference to Jesus as well. Through the Hadiths, they reduce his exposure down to prophet status, which is how they would find it acceptable. Christians won't. So there's going to be a loyal group of Christians who are not going to accept this. So, but it's these monotheist groups that are going to be the big problem on the pushback.
But I think we are seeing at least baby steps.
Well, more than baby steps, I think. If they're baby steps, they're coming quite rapidly. So they're moving in that direction, and they're having an amazing amount of success. And they don't have the evangelicals in North America yet, but they're very close in bringing them on. But the problem is, as I said, is they have to compromise, and the only way that Christians will be accepted into this universal religion is that if Jesus is degraded from Son of God and Word of God status and creator of the world thereof down to a prophet and somebody who didn't die on the cross, that it was just an allegory. And that's going to be the deception that they're going to pitch to deceive most Christians, but there's going to be a lot of people who don't accept it as well. But it will be this umbrella religion that is going to come home to what they're going to present to us, the religion that is the same religion that was in prehistory, that was in all the ancient civilizations. It's just that the monotheists through Israel went rogue and created a new religion, and that Moses was a polytheist, and they're going to create all sorts of these sort of stories to deceive people into accepting this umbrella religion, where you can practice your local vernacular religion, but it's still umbrellaed under this polytheist religion, and if they get their way, centered in Rome.
Yeah. So thank you for that assessment. And now before we dive into our subject, I had a comment here, and the gentleman was saying something along the lines that that it is detrimental trying to keep the bloodline pure, and that interbreeding would be more beneficial than inbreeding, because if they can spread the tainted DNA, that would work to their benefit, because that type of DNA is, as he says, irredeemable, non-redeemable.
Yeah, well, number of things in there. So let's start with that physicalities, in my belief, don't control salvation. Only your faith does. And Jesus' sacrifice and atonement is greater than all the sins of the world, except for violations against creation. But I would separate that from this bloodline or this DNA that might be disseminated that's out there from the giants and the fallen angels is you would have to choose to do that yourself, to violate the laws of creation. And even biblically, out of the Old Testament law, you don't see sins of the father carried beyond the third or fourth generation. So I don't think straight, just because you've got DNA or a bloodline that goes back to the giants, that has anything to do with salvation. It's a strictly spiritual issue and a faith issue, and following and believing in God, in Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Now, in terms of the bloodlines, it is true that if you continue to intermarry, you will get diseases. And we see that, just as with the European royal families in World War I was basically, a household civil war, because they were all cousins, right? The Romanovs intermarried with the Windsors and the Kaisers and the Habsburgs and all the various thrones. It was a family dispute is what was going on. And because they intermarried so much to keep their pedigree up, because pedigree is everything within that cult and culture, they develop blood diseases like hemophiliac disease and the Habsburg jaw as a couple of examples, and there's other ones. And so they do want to intermarry and keep that bloodline pure, because it sets their stature and their pedigree and their hierarchy within their families and organizations. But they have to bring in other lower level bloodlines that may still be distant cousins, like fifth or sixth cousin, to replenish that DNA and blood so that they keep the diseases at a lower level. But they've always intermarried right from when the kingships were started. And we see that in all of the ancient dynasties, where they married the wives of each other and start with a new pure blood female, because the matriarchal line would start new dynasties. And that's how they created new dynasties, is through the matriarchal, at least in how they've written down how they've started that and talked about that. But you still have to be able to keep things free of disease. And of course, we saw this, and we see this even to this day. The royals are intermarrying with royals, and they tend to have Rh negative blood. We don't know whether or not that's a direct tie or not, but the Windsors, for example, out of England, have OH negative blood, which is the most sought after of the Rh negative bloodline. So there may be something to that or not, and it goes back to this whole blood ideology, back to the Rosicrucians and the Vril, where you have something in the blood that they always believed and are working on, that if they could backwards engineer, they could create the demigods of old. And it's the same thing that the Nazis adopted in their Ariosophy religion, that is a spin-off of Theosophy, which was in vogue, which is what we know today as the New Age religion. And they overlaid the Rosicrucian ideology of Vril and the Volkish ideology, which includes the Grail and the Grail bloodline ideology, onto this ancient Thule ideology, and blended it all in together into their new religion and their new belief system. And they were also working on a new man concept of interbreeding to create the new Nephilim. So they're working on it from going forward and trying to work on it going backwards. So this is a concept that they believe in, and from a DNA aspect, they call that the gene of Isis, which is the root for the word Genesis, at least from their belief system. And that they believe that this bloodline, and specifically this gene, is dispersed around the world. And that's why they wanted to have world government and a world religion, is to unite this DNA, to unite these bloodlines, so that they can have this harmonic convergence to evolve into and vibrate into godhood. So it's one of the end time promises that they're going to promise. And we know this in some of the speeches of the occultists, because they also call this the 1,000 points of light. And the Bush family is very famous for this speech, both George Sr. and George Jr. And George Jr. just did it again at his father's funeral, he mentions 1,000 points of light. And this is the spark of the divine, or the spark of the Nephilim, or the spark of the fallen angels that they want to unite in this new world order. And so this is all part of what they're trying to do in bringing about the end time, and why they track DNA, and why they track genealogies, and why they're always on the lookout for this gene and the bloodline.
Mm-hmm. I noticed a couple of days ago there was one lady, and she was saying something under a video. She made a comment along the lines that she's praying every day that God might forgive her because she has Rh negative blood. And I read this comment and I thought, this is really sad. And she was driving herself crazy because of
Yes. Yeah, and I get a lot of people, contacting me, and my standard response is that has nothing to do with salvation. If you believe in Jesus, accept God, you are forgiven and you are saved. There is no other qualifications. Yeah. And so as much as we can spread that information so that people aren't feeling poorly about it. And conversely, on the other side, if you're part of the New Age, if you're part of these Gnostic religions and secret societies, they look at these things as starseed, as they like to call it, right? That you are special, that you are superior, which goes right back to that Nephilim new man concept, that they believe they're superior to humankind, which is why they want to rule over us and why they make up most of the elite.
I have my doubts there, because if they are fighting so hard to suppress us, then there must be something very special about it.
Exactly. And they want to replace us, right? So they want what's been promised to us, that we've been promised to be raised above angels in the future time. And it's a resolution to the angelic rebellion that was set in place, because God is Alpha Omega. So all of this is just to let things play out. But through free choice, God will raise us above humans because he's greater than free choice.
Yeah, thank you for that again. I think it cannot be said often enough, because there's a lot of confusion out there and a lot of people that are beating themselves up, and others that are telling them,
yes,
negative bloodline, don't even bother.
Yeah. And if people want some information on it, get a hold of me. I have a document that I can send people, or I have a Facebook commentary with pictures, so that people can look at what the facts are of what it is, and then understand. And I'll say right in there, it has nothing to do with salvation. It's just, but here's the facts of what it is, because most people don't even know what Rh negative is, or what it means, or where it comes from, or how it's passed on, or anything like that.
Okay. So, Gary, let us first dissect who is Azazel and who is Shemyaza.
Well, that's a good question. And again, another question that comes up very, very regularly with people who contact me. And some people will say Shemyaza is the leader of the Watchers out of the Book of First Enoch, and other people say Azazel is. And surprisingly, more people think Shemyaza is than Azazel. I think they're the same angel. I think that over time, as the translations have come down and we don't have an existing complete Hebrew manuscript, we only have some small fragments of it, and we have a reference in Jude to know that this probably has part of it that shows up in First Enoch, but we only have Ge'ez and Aramaic, and Ge'ez is the only one that's considered complete. And so it seems that there's been over time a splitting of these into two different angels. And if you look at the responsibilities and how they're talked about and the type of knowledge that they passed on, they seem to be the same angel. But more importantly, Shemyaza doesn't end in EL. And all the other angels' names that I'm aware of, biblically or otherwise, all end in EL. Even Satan, if you take that back to Isaiah 14:12, it's Hail El. that is transliterated or mistranslated as Lucifer in the King James Version Bible. So Michael would be another one, or Gabriel. Baal would be another one out of the occult, right? Because A-L, E-L, those are just transliterations of the same word. And then when you look at Semyaza, you see at the end of Semyaza that there's A-Z-A, which is part of the series of root words for Azazel, which means like forces and armies and war, and is the god, and same root word for Maaz, which is the god of forces in Daniel, that roots back. Just as Azazel in Leviticus 16, which is the scapegoat for all of the sins of the world, of the ancient world, links back into that same series of words. So I think that this is just a corruption over time as it comes down into Ge'ez and into Aramaic. And Shem is also a word that comes out of Hebrew for some Shem Ayim, which is heaven, and or Shem, which is related and kind of equal as renown. So this is Azaz, sort of a warrior god of renown from heaven. So it's kind of more of a description. And it's thought to be also a word that is what they call a Zen word, or a word that comes down out of Zoroastrianism and Aramaic as a word for angel. So if that is a word or a Zen word for angel at the beginning as a prefix and or a Hebrew description with A-Z-A at the end, I think it's the same angel. And Azazel clearly seems to be the main one, because he's considered the host of the rebellious angels, of the Watchers, and again I'm going to quote from First Enoch, but the Ge'ez version, or the longer version, so it might be a couple of verses further along if you've got the Aramaic version. In chapters 54, he's called the hosts of Azazel are cast into the abyss, clearly saying that these impassioned angels went into the abyss and they follow Azazel. And also in chapter 55, it says Azazel and all his hosts and associates. And again, I have a document people can have if they want to see how Azazel links into Abaddon and Apollyon and the son of perdition, and how that links back to the god of forces in Daniel. But I believe that's all the same angel. And so Shemyaza, in my opinion, I know that was a long answer, I think it's just been corrupted over time, and there are corruptions in the book of Enoch. And I have a document on that if people want to see a few of them. I think it runs 99%, 98% with scripture, but it's got things in there that shouldn't be in there. So I think it's got some markers in there with some Gnostic and Freemason markers in there, particularly with the influence of Alexander Bruce, who first translated the Ge'ez version way before the Aramaic version was found. And he is a descendant of Robert the Bruce, a Gnostic, and a Freemason. And their MO is to leave markers in whatever they translate. So I can show people some of the corruptions in there. But overall, I really like the first book of Enoch, but we do need to be careful with it.
Mm-hmm. You won't believe it, but it's telling me again that your internet connection is bad.
Is that right? Well, I tested it again. I'm testing like almost 200 on the upload and download. So
don't worry. I'm just telling you. Yeah. That is why I had the
well, then is my picture coming through good?
It's okay.
And
Everything is
okay.
Yeah.
So we got some more gremlins coming around.
So, is it fair to say that they ruled for a while, the fallen angels here on Earth?
Oh, I think it's more than safe to say that. I think before the flood, the sons of God, or the Seraphim angels, as they come out of Isaiah 6, and these are the watchers, and we get the name watchers in Daniel 4, who deal with the governance of God, which appears 3 times in Daniel 4, watchers. These were the ones that were governing the antediluvian epoch and leading the whole epoch astray, and are the ones who create the Nephilim in Genesis 6, and also provide the illicit knowledge from heaven, right? That is going to accelerate the 7 sacred sciences that Enoch, son of Cain, is developing along with Lamech and his children, and creates the mystical religions and the secret societies, at least according to their records, as they present prehistory. And so these were the cult centers around the world. Some variations, there's, outside the Bible, is anywhere from 4 to 9, and who knows, there may have been more. 7 typically is the standard number, but some people believe there's as many as 11 or 13 or 12. So who knows how many there actually were. In the Bible, we probably see 1, which is probably the Sumerian version, as opposed to some of the other ones, whether or not it's Mu or it's Atlantis, and many, many different names around the world. So yes, I think they ruled. And there's also a thought that they ruled even before day 1, that somehow the world became void, and that's the angelic wars that we see in accounts like the Greek, where you have the rebellion of the Titans, and also you have in the Hindu religion these fabulous accounts in the Vedas of the wars of the gods, and that's how the world was destroyed, became void, and then was renewed, just as the Holy Spirit renews the earth in 104, Psalms 104.
Mm-hmm. How long was that time period, approximately?
Before the flood and after day 7. Typically, when we look at that, it's going to be about 1,400 years, 1,500 years, on a biblical scale. So if you take somewhere around 4,000 BC, and then you get as you do the chronology back through the genealogies, at the time of the flood, it'll be somewhere between 23 and 2,400 BC. Secular history has that dated more about 3,000 BC for the flood. So you need to pick which way you want to go on that, and what is the start date, right? Which is the real question when you're looking at that chronology. And so when you look at how far into that 1,500 years, maybe as many as 1,600 years, that the pre-flood time was, and you look at the Nephilim being created in the time of Noah and in Jared's generation, as the book of Enoch talks about, that's the 6th generation. And sometime in Noah lived 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. So that means sometime after Noah is born, because it's clearly said in Scripture, the days of Noah. And so one would think that they ruled for at least 500 years of that 600 years.
Okay.
That's the Nephilim. The Seraphim would have ruled right from creation, the recreation on.
Mm-hmm. And these Seraphim angels, you said that they have a snake face, yeah?
Yes, they do. They're described as seraph, and the male plural is seraphim, the I am. And as you take that back to Hebrew with its meaning, seraph and seraphim, they're described as fiery serpent angels. Mm-hmm. And they serve before God in Isaiah 6. And anytime you've got serpent in English in the Bible, you have to check to see whether it goes back to Nakash, which is the serpent in Eden, or seraphim, because it's used not a lot, but in very specific occasions where they're referring to something different than the average serpent. But in Isaiah 6, they are fiery serpent angels because they're ministers before God, working amongst the fiery stones.
Mm-hmm. So now I have a little problem imagining that women would like to mate with a hideous creature that has a snake face.
Yeah, that would take some doing, I would think. And I think if and it's a great argument for saying, well, why would they do that? But here's the thing: is what we do know is that their creators were fiery serpent angels and are described as such and shown as much. The gods of the ancient worlds are shown for the most part with snake faces. There's some other different ones like lions and sort of a raven or a bird, which are kind of different kinds of angels, I think, that were part of the rebellion as well. Because I think all classes of angels were part of the rebellion. So what we do know is that depictions of the kings all around the world in prehistory were also shown as serpents, just as Akhenaten, circa 1200 to 1400 BC, has that elongated chin, high cheekbones, large wraparound eyes, and of course they were in the original generation, these eyes glowed, elongated skull, that gives you that serpentine look. And that look has degraded with the interbreeding that we talked about and introducing outside bloodlines and human bloodlines over time. One reason why we may not see them as serpents today, but not all of the possible reasons. And what we don't know, which kind of leads into that, is that we don't know whether or not they volunteered.
Yeah, there is this one scripture where it says that they took all the women that they wanted.
Yes.
I'm paraphrasing here,
yeah.
But it certainly does not sound as if there were many questions asked. So I'm thinking along the lines, if we are dealing here with forced breeding, and or were they able to shapeshift, meaning appear in a more attractive form instead of having a snake face?
So two things on that. So first of all is that they took any that they chose. That's people want to check that verse. It's Genesis 6 verses 1 through 4 where you're going to see that. And so that generally means that there wasn't a choice involved. Some of them may have chose, and some of them may have been quite taken by them. And so the only way that that's going to happen is that, first of all, let's look at the angels as opposed to the Nephilim, because two different interbreeding that's going on as you move forward. So the angels are thought to have a changeling capability, so which is how that they can take a physical form or a spiritual form in this world so that they could physically have sex. And we see this as an example throughout the Bible where we get angels having many different forms. Some are recognized as angels with wings, some are glowing beings, some are humans that are recognized as angels, some are humans that are not recognized as angels. And you can see that they take these different forms. And even when these two of them go to Sodom and Gomorrah, what do some of the residents want to do? They want to have sex with these two angels. But they're described as men, but they know that they're angels, and then they know that they've come to judge them. And as Jude talks about, this is strange flesh that they want to have sex with, and it's an absolutely abominable discussion. I think this is talking about that whole ideology that they have this changeling form and that they can have sex. And if we look at Jude 1:6 as well, you have they left their habitation, and habitation goes back to the Greek word oikoterion, which is only used one other place in Corinthians, and goes to the same sort of ideology because that word goes back to Greek as a dwelling place for the spirit. So that's the place where they left, and he needed this dwelling place for the spirit there. They need a dwelling place for the spirit, or a physical body in this world, just as there's bodies of heaven and there's bodies of the earth. And so I think all of this suggests that they could have changed and had any form they chose to be attractive to women to create the original giants. Now, does this trait get spread to the Nephilim? This we don't know. but there's a strong mythos that says that these reptilian beings have the ability to hide their form from us even to this day. I don't have any evidence of that. I recognize that as a possibility. Or it's, as I said, it's just the dilution of the bloodlines all the way through. But it's an open question for sure.
Yeah. When you said last time Azazel hung in Orion, what do you mean by that?
Well, that's the accounts that come out of the occult, and that's how they describe them. And of course, Orion is a very famous as a hunter or a Nephilim hunter, and where the angels come from in that sort of occult belief system. And Orion is where some of the gods reincarnate back to, like Osiris, Isis, they all go back to Orion. And Orion is thought to be a Nephilim hunter in Greek mythology who chases after the Pleiades sisters, which is another sort of story that's connected to the flood, but we're not going to go down that angle right now. So when we talked about Azazel being the scapegoat, as he's described in Leviticus 16 on the second goat, which is the scapegoat, which is sacrificed on the Day of Atonement. That word scapegoat goes back to Hebrew as Azazel. And we're not told why there's a second goat that's Azazel. In other English translations, it actually just says Azazel, doesn't say scapegoat, but it means the same thing. Because he was the one held responsible for leading the world into the apocalypse through the illicit knowledge. Most of it comes from him. He teaches war and how to war and how to enslave humankind, and he's using the Nephilim to do that. So he is the scapegoat, and he's hung in Orion, as they say, for his sins. And they represent him in the occult, typically with a pentagram in the background, which is a 5-pointed star. Which is a representation of him and being hung in Orion. But clearly in the Bible we have the abyss, and clearly we have in Enoch that Azazel is put in Dudiel and into the abyss. And it may be just an allegory in the occult, but they do believe that Orion plays a big part in this whole assorted prehistory.
Mm-hmm. We have a lot of people that are claiming that they are summoning Azazel, that he is helping them. Even if you click on YouTube, you type in Azazel and then you go into filters and you click on channels, there's no end to Azazel channels. Yeah. So what are we dealing here with? If he's in the abyss, then what are these people summoning?
Exactly, and which is also part of the reason why I think they create this parallel story that he's hung in Orion, right? So that makes them maybe more accessible, because I don't think the abyss is in Orion. I think it's in the earth, maybe in a different dimension, but I think it's in the earth. So if he's in the abyss and if he's locked up, no matter even out in space or in the abyss, he's not going to be able to communicate because he's being punished. So there are people I don't believe are communing with Azazel. Now in Enoch, we get several angels that have a similar spelling again, that to sort of variations. So it could be an angel that sounds like Azazel, or it could be an angel imitating Azazel. I think it's more likely demons who do these things. I don't think angels would take the risk of making their punishment so much worse. The demons tend to do all of these things that the angel don't tend to want to do. And I think it's the demons that they're communicating with as their spiritual guide, or as aliens, or whatever the mythos that is out there, that they're talking to these entities that come from their white brotherhood. And there's, like I said, there's many celestial names to these various groups and entities. So I think I think they're being deceived, because in my opinion, we won't see Abaddon or hear from Abaddon until the end time, until the abyss is opened in Revelation 9, which is at least a year or two into the last 7 years. And we're not into the last 7 years yet.
Mm-hmm. So we have warfare. He's also connected to child sacrifice, yeah?
Yes.
What else?
Child sacrifice war, the art of making war, the strategy, virtually most of the knowledge that is coming from heaven, whether or not it's witchcraft or magic or sorceries, of which is pharmacacia, basically. Most of the knowledge comes from Azazel. Now, we get accounts in Enoch where there are 6 other angels that also provide some knowledge, but it tends to be very basic knowledge. And the big knowledge, and why I think Azazel is the one as the scapegoat, is because he provides most of this illicit, illegal knowledge and the warfare knowledge, and is the one who parades the antediluvian world into the first apocalypse by water.
Mm-hmm. I heard somebody who was referring to himself as Azazel, that Azazel only taught warfare and how to make weapons so that humans can defend themselves. But as I said, that does not hold water, because that means if all of that had to be introduced to us, then that means that this was none of our business. We were not involved in that, and he had to teach it step by step.
I agree, and I know Cain corrupts part of the world, and Cain kills Abel, and we get some levels of violence, and as Josephus says, each generation became more evil as it went. But there would be no need, as you say, to teach war if there was known before. There'd be no need to teach how to make the weapons of war if it was known before. So clearly he introduces this as a way of humans destroying themselves, and then later with the creation of Nephilim to take it to a whole new level so that they can absolutely control, dominate, enslave, and destroy humans and use them for whatever they want.
Yeah. Is it slightly possible that there is more than one Azazel? We know there is more than one Enoch, more than one Lamech. Is that possible?
It certainly is possible. As I say, there's several names in the first book of Enoch that are very similar to Azazel. Whether or not it's the same angel, those ones don't appear to be. But what we are told is there are several Satans in the book of Enoch. There's
Excuse me, the several Satans?
Satans, yes,
okay.
as in Hell. And so then there's also a Satan singular, which is the leader over all in the first book of Enoch. So there are several adversaries. So there could be several like Azazel. Azazel is the right-hand man for Satan. And there's also the 10 main leaders and the 7 main angels, and there's several ranks, and I think all of these higher ones are those other Satans that led the rebellion and were part of the impassioned watchers. So I think if that's the case, then there's several ones like Azazel, and whether or not they're representing as being like Azazel or being another Azazel or they're another Satan, is hard to know, but the concept is open-ended on that as well, that there's at least many that assume a similar type of positioning and role by the sounds.
Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit about the X and other symbols that are connected to Azazel. What about the hooked X?
Yeah, well, the hooked X is part of the Templar iconology, or glyphs, I guess is a better word for it. And so just as the X is, represents, the bottom half comes out like this, that's the male representation, or the spades and the playing cards, and The upper one is the V, which is the female goddess, and that's what that is. But when you have a hook X, now you've got another meaning attached onto that, because that's the greater mother goddess, male god, polytheist symbol with the X, but with the hook X, that, as I recall, is symbolizing Mary Magdalene's bloodline with Jesus, which is a second sort of line, bloodline that they've scioned or grafted into the Nephilim bloodlines, that is all going to be part of Antichrist in the end time. And so you want to bring that sort of X back to sort of full circle. In the occult believing is that maybe the Rosicrucis, stands for Red Cross as one of the main understandings, but the allegorical meaning coming out of the Rosicrucians comes from the word crux, because the three letters of the crux, or the three bars of the crux, forms the hieroglyph for light. And if you look at the hieroglyph for light, it's got a sort of a triangle and a pyramid underneath with a cross with two crossbars, right? And so crux is Latin for a tree or a letter T or a cross. Now, where all that all comes together is that third bar. That's the three letters. Where is that coming from? Well, that's the allegory for the double cross, which is that second bloodline in addition to the Nephilim bloodline, which is the cross of Lorraine. You can see on Oreo cookies or on a lot of different corporate iconology that's out there today. That goes back to not only to the kings of Lorraine, which produced the Anjou, the Payan, and the Bouillon. These are three of the main founders to the Knights Templar, who create this hook X glyph, and they take their bloodlines back to the Merovingians, back to the Nephilim bloodlines, and back through the Scion bloodline, Mary Magdalene and Jesus, because they believe Jesus did not die on the cross, that he survived to produce children with Mary Magdalene, whom Josephus is the one that they like to promote as that survivor who marries into the Pendragon, no coincidence, their names, dynasties in England, and then through Aragon from that bloodline marries Aminabad of the Merovingians to pass on that dual bloodline, which now becomes the double-cross bloodline of Lorraine. And what's also interesting about the double cross that you'll see is that if you were to close those bars like this, which they do in occult iconology, that becomes now the double-headed axe, which was the preferred weapon along with a club of the Nephilim. So it's just absolutely loaded with occult iconology.
Mm-hmm. But this hook, as you said, symbolizes a female character.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I will not I will not tell you what other story I heard about this. It's too insane. So, why do you think this character, Azazel, is so popular these days?
Because he is the one who, along with Satan, brings knowledge. And in their belief system, knowledge and immortality creates godhood. And so it's this knowledge that they're offering in the godhood part of that whole mythos, which is why I think he's so popular. And that in that whole brainwashing process that they're teaching them is that they're teaching that the rebellious angels and Satan are the good angels. And they're the ones who want to free humankind. And it's the God of the Bible in their belief system who is the evil God, who oppresses humans, who keeps them enslaved in ignorance and in the physical world, and will never promote them to gods, which they're they're producing. And they say that the examples of how evil God is not only enslaving people in ignorance, but he brought on the flood to wipe out humanity. And then all the evil things that he permitted at Sodom and Gomorrah, destroying that city, how Israel destroyed all of these so-called innocent people in the Exodus as they take the land of the promised land. All of these nations, by the way, were Nephilim nations or Rephaim nations and Rephaim hybrids, which I have a 14-part series if people want a full walking through of the Nephilim wars after the flood. Just get a hold of me and I'll send that to you. So they're just turning everything upside down and inside out. And so these are the ones that are going to free people, but they're offering this false godhood. And the only thing that they can offer is a false godhood in the physical world. So longer lives, maybe clone bodies that you can do consciousness transfer, maybe transhumanism bodies, on and on and on and on, that they could offer, plus the knowledge that they have to offer to create those two aspects of God that they like to say are the two pillars of being a God. And I think this whole knowledge is actually being created to create these clones, not for humans, but for the bodiless spirits of the Nephilim to inhabit, because they can't interact in the world today. As Jesus says, they thirst for a body. They don't actually thirst for a body, but they're searching for a body, is what Jesus says, because they can't interact unless they try and possess a body. And in possession, they can't really interact properly. It's a forced possession, and of course we see, head spinning and all those other wonderful things that are associated with possession.
But what is that? Who or what possesses somebody?
Well, it's the spirit of the Nephilim. And so what happened is, in the original Nephilim, and again, I have a document on this if people want it, and I'll lay it all out biblically for them, is that God moves in 6:3 and limits all life to 120 years. People think that's the commission of Noah as it's allegorized, but there's only 100 years between his when his sons are born and when he enters on the ship, and that's where the story is. So the math doesn't work there. So 120 years is the lifespan that is imposed on all beings and generations going forward, because the immortal spirit from these angels were passed on to their offspring, the Nephilim, and they became a demigod, which is the definition of a demigod, is the offspring of a god and a human female, and they had the immortal spirit that they could live forever. So God limits this, but their bodies can't live forever. They're still restricted to the laws of this earth, and they don't have access to the tree of life, right? So their bodies eventually die, or they commit suicide because of the pain and the agony that they're in. But their spirits are not permitted to go to sleep like humans are. And they're not permitted to go into heaven. They're sentenced to wander the earth until their time of judgment. And so that's why they thirst to have a body to interact with the world some way, somehow. So when we create, in the future, clone bodies, we're creating vessels, a habitation, an oikotarian that we talked about, for these demons to take a physical form in this world, because they can't create that themselves like the angels can.
And what do you think? I mean, we are not done with Azazel. So much is, I guess, safe to say. What do you think will that look like? How we are going to deal with him again once the Antichrist has been revealed and everything goes haywire?
Well, when Azazel comes up out of the abyss and is leading the scorpion beings in Revelation 9, I mean, he's the one that's going to be sponsoring the Magog War, Joel 1 and 2, and the 200 million man war that's recorded in Revelation 9, which is the false Armageddon that Antichrist is going to say that he wins the war as part of his credibility and coming in like Jesus does at Armageddon to deceive the world, and then he gets crowned in the temple with the abomination. And so how does this fit in with Azazel? Well, as this is also happening, we understand that the two witnesses that are warning the world of what is coming, at the 3.5-year point, the one who comes up out of the abyss slays the two witnesses. And secondly, Antichrist is called the son of perdition, right? And he is also the one who comes up out of the abyss later on, as he's described in Revelation, as he's described, taking over the empire, and the one who comes from perdition. And perdition goes back to a series of Greek words that include Apollyon and Apollo and several different words, but specifically Apollyon meaning destroyer, just as Abaddon means destroyer, and he's the son of Apollyon, which, as I said, is connected to Azazel, because Apollyon and Abaddon are the same angel, and Abaddon is destroyer, and this destroyer is Azazel, who is the destroyer of the antediluvian world, and the god of forces, as we talked about, that Antichrist is going to honor. And that's the word Maus, which goes back to that series of words of Azza and Azaz and Azazel, that all connects back to him, just as Abaddon is the destroyer that's talked about in Jeremiah 50 that destroys Babylon, and Antichrist destroys Babylon. And Antichrist receives a mortal head wound and is resurrected. And at that time, I think Azazel avatars Antichrist to make him a true son of perdition. Whether or not he has a genealogy back to Azazel or not, he probably will produce that, but will also be possessed by Azazel in the end time. So all of this is completely connected, and why Azazel and understanding who Azazel is so important to understanding end time prophecy.
Mm. And what do you think? Some people, they have replaced Jesus with an alien. What do you make of that?
Well, from their perspective, that makes sense, because whether or not people look at Jesus as an angel, and some of them do, whether or not they look at him as angels, as aliens, which is now we're talking as an equivalent type of being, then all of that sort of leads into that they would make Jesus as an alien. And technically, all the beings that come from outside the earth, and heaven in this case, whether they're angels or God or the Word of God that became flesh, they're alien to the earth. So whether or not they're playing with semantics or they're just degrading him down to a level so that they can deceive people in the end time, probably both. Because again, what they can't do is recognize him as the Son of God or the Word of God to have a universal religion and a world government that is going to permit that universal religion, or vice versa. So it's all part of that degradation strategy from 1,000 different points to make Jesus not washed from history, but to take his part as another prophet or another angel that will be acceptable to the other religions.
Mm. Yeah, there are interesting times still ahead.
There certainly are. And the events are happening more quickly as we go, just as we were told about birth pangs.
Yeah. Do you have mixed feelings when you think about the tribulation?
Yeah, I think anybody in their right mind probably doesn't want to go through it. It's going to be absolutely horrible. And we hope that we're going to be saved from some of that, but we don't know exactly when the rapture is going to be coming. I have my views. I don't, there's a lot of different views, but the question is do you want to go through it? No, but it's coming. And the only way to get to Jesus' coming is through the tribulation and through Armageddon, so that we can move into the millennium. So it has to happen, and what must take place will take place, but I would prefer not to go through it. But my research shows that we are going to see, as part of it, a significant part of that, we're going to be saved from the wrath, which happens in the last 3.5 years. But we should expect to see tribulation, and we will have to think very hard about how we role model, so that we can try and, through how we handle ourselves, wake other people up and save themselves as well before it's too late.
Gary, thank you so much for coming back and doing this.
You're quite welcome.
And yeah, it went pretty smooth compared to last time.
That's good.
I was a little bit on the edge when I told you it's telling me again. But
Internet
now,
connection, yep.
Yeah. But now, after that, I monitored everything there. And no, after that, it was okay.
Good. Well, hopefully it syncs well with the first half, so hopefully I wasn't too redundant.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Yep.
No, definitely not.
Okay.
So, okay, guys, this was part 1. Part 2 is already out there. But who cares? There are much, much worse things. So, good night, everybody. This was Night Flight. Thank you, Gary, for coming. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thank you. See you.